When the galaxy map was projected in a massive hologram at Navenia, the headquarters of the Human Federation, all eyes focused intently on the two large red regions. On one side was the Cerathian Empire, and on the other, the Draken Collective. The Human Federation, squeezed between these giants, controlled only a few systems. The clouds of war loomed overhead like shadows, threatening the very existence of the Federation. Commander Ryle stood in the strategy room surrounded by his senior officers. The echoes of an interstellar conflict had reached Navenia under a dark sky. As Ryle's gaze roamed over the hologram, he tried to conceal the tension beneath his calm exterior. "What's the situation?" Ryle asked in a firm tone. Lieutenant Verda, checking the data in her hand, quickly responded. "Commander, the Draken Collective's outpost is about to be attacked. The Cerathian forces are on the move. The Draken outpost can't survive this assault on its own." Ryle's eyes locked onto the small blue dot on the hologram, representing the Draken outpost. Though the Drakens appeared less aggressive than the Cerathians, they were strategically dangerous. If the outpost fell, the Cerathians would swiftly expand, and the Human Federation could be torn apart in the middle of this war. Colonel Jaren, standing to Ryle's right, stepped closer with slow, deliberate movements. His face showed concern, but his expression remained cold as he spoke. "The Federation is trapped between these two giants. We're trying to stay neutral, but we won't last much longer." Ryle nodded, his eyes never leaving the map, lost in thought. Diplomacy had been trying to maintain the balance, but neutrality was becoming harder to sustain as war consumed the galaxy. Without the right moves, the Federation would be swallowed by the Cerathians on one side and the Drakens on the other. "Neutrality is no longer enough," Ryle said, turning his gaze to Verda. "If we don't find a way to balance these two powers, they'll destroy us." Verda frowned. "Commander, we can't openly support either side. If we help the Draken Collective, the Cerathians will notice and retaliate. The same goes for aiding the Cerathians." Ryle took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. He had to find a way to win this war without openly backing one side, instead manipulating the two forces into weakening each other. Both diplomatic and military maneuvers would be crucial. But time was running out. "The Cerathians have the advantage right now," Jaren said. "But the Drakens are holding on defensively. If we let them weaken, the Cerathians will become even more aggressive." "We have to allow both sides to wear each other down," Ryle replied. "But we need to intervene without giving the impression that we're openly supporting them." Verda nodded thoughtfully. "It's a dangerous game, Commander." Ryle understood Verda's concerns, but there was no other option. "It might be dangerous, but this is the only way we can survive this war." Jaren leaned closer to the screen and began speaking again. "The Cerathians' attack on the Draken outpost could weaken a large portion of their forces. If we provide the Drakens with small, covert assistance, we could halt the Cerathians' advance." Ryle listened carefully to Jaren's suggestion. Covert operations could allow the two sides to keep attacking each other without directly implicating the Federation. "We need to act in secret. We'll hurt the Cerathians but without empowering the Drakens too much. Our goal is to maintain balance." Verda quickly drafted a rough plan. "We know the Cerathians' weaknesses. With precise, strategic strikes, we can slow them down. We can provide indirect support to the Draken outpost, but we must do it discreetly." As Ryle mentally pieced together the plan, he calculated the galactic power dynamics. One wrong move could drag the Federation directly into the conflict. This operation must go unnoticed. "We'll wear down the Cerathians and give the Drakens just enough breathing room." Jaren nodded in agreement. "If we do this right, the two sides will wear each other out while we stay in the background." Ryle stood in silence for a moment in the strategy room. Several tactical options had been developed, but this plan was by far the riskiest. The Federation's future depended on this covert operation. Lieutenant Verda, begin preparations for the operation immediately, Ryle commanded firmly. If we miss this chance, we won't get another. Verda quickly exited the room to carry out her orders. Ryle placed his hand on the edge of the table, scrutinizing the data on the screen. The enemy fleet positions and attack plans were all laid out before him. War was inevitable, but who would emerge victorious was still in Ryle's hands. This may be their war, Ryle muttered to himself, but we must survive in its shadow. If we make the right moves, we can create a new balance in the galaxy. Jaren turned to Ryle and nodded slowly. But creating that balance will be harder than we think. Challenges won't stop us, Colonel, Ryle replied with determination. We didn't start this war, but we can be the ones to end it. And so, the first move had been made. The Human Federation, caught between the galaxy's two great powers, was determined to maintain its existence by balancing these two empires. Ryle and his team would continue to develop new strategies in the shadow of the war, shaping the future of the Federation. At Navenia's military port, there was a flurry of activity. Ships were being refitted, and the crew was receiving briefings down to the smallest detail. The success of this operation was critical for the survival of the Federation. No one could overlook the magnitude of the risk involved. Commander Ryle took a brief moment away from the strategy room to watch the military preparations outside. The soldiers' determination and disciplined work gave him a glimmer of hope. The mission was dangerous, every step could draw the wrath of two powerful empires. But this also meant there was no other option. Colonel Jaren approached Ryle, glancing at the ships, and asked, "Will such a small fleet be enough, Commander?" Without taking his eyes off the ships, Ryle replied, "In this mission, secrecy is more important than anything else, Colonel. Neither the Sarathians nor the Drakons must suspect the Federation's involvement. We'll conduct small but effective strikes." Jaren nodded in agreement. "We're making moves that could change the course of the war. If the Drakons successfully resist the Sarathians, they'll wear each other down while we stay in the background." Ryle's gaze hardened. That was the plan, not to disappear between two empires, but to shape the balance of the galaxy through strategic interventions. However, each move hinged on delicate balances. A single misstep could spell the end of the Federation. Ryle had faith in the covert operations team led by Verda. They had successfully completed numerous dangerous missions across the galaxy. But this time, they weren't facing an ordinary enemy, this was a clash of two great empires. The Sarathian Empire's hunger for war, combined with the cold strategic intellect of the Drakon Collective, posed a monumental challenge. Ryle took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is not a game. If we leave even the slightest trace, and it's discovered that the Federation took sides, both empires will turn on us." Jaren remained silent for a moment, contemplating Ryle's words. He, too, understood the gravity of the situation, but sometimes bold steps were necessary to achieve results. "What's the status of Lieutenant Verda and her team?" he asked at last. At Navenia's military port, there was a flurry of activity. Ships were being refitted, and the crew was receiving briefings down to the smallest detail. The success of this operation was critical for the survival of the Federation. No one could overlook the magnitude of the risk involved. Commander Ryle took a brief moment away from the strategy room to watch the military preparations outside. The soldiers' determination and disciplined work gave him a glimmer of hope. The mission was dangerous, every step could draw the wrath of two powerful empires. But this also meant there was no other option. Colonel Jaren approached Ryle, glancing at the ships, and asked, "Will such a small fleet be enough, Commander?" Without taking his eyes off the ships, Ryle replied, "In this mission, secrecy is more important than anything else, Colonel. Neither the Sarathians nor the Drakons must suspect the Federation's involvement. We'll conduct small but effective strikes." Jaren nodded in agreement. We're making moves that could change the course of the war. If the Drakons successfully resist the Sarathians, they'll wear each other down while we stay in the background. Ryle's gaze hardened. That was the plan, not to disappear between two empires, but to shape the balance of the galaxy through strategic interventions. However, each move hinged on delicate balances. A single misstep could spell the end of the Federation. Ryle had faith in the covert operations team led by Verda. They had successfully completed numerous dangerous missions across the galaxy. But this time, they weren't facing an ordinary enemy. This was a clash of two great empires. The Sarathian Empire's hunger for war, combined with the cold strategic intellect of the Drakon Collective, posed a monumental challenge. Ryle took a deep breath and began to speak. This is not a game. If we leave even the slightest trace, and it's discovered that the Federation took sides, both empires will turn on us. Jaren remained silent for a moment, contemplating Ryle's words. He, too, understood the gravity of the situation, but sometimes bold steps were necessary to achieve results. "What's the status of Lieutenant Verda and her team?" he asked at last. "Proceed," Verda said, her voice firm. "We're running out of time. Finish the sabotage and get out of there." The sabotage team quickly finished planting the explosives as the Sarathian ships neared the station. In a matter of minutes, a major battle would erupt, and the humans needed to be long gone by then. Verda's team successfully sabotaged the critical points, and the explosives were in place. "All right, we're pulling out," Verda ordered as the ships began their rapid retreat. "Max out the cloaking systems." When the explosives detonated, chaos erupted among the Sarathian ships. Their communication systems failed, and their engines malfunctioned. In the midst of the confusion, the Drakons seized the opportunity. The station launched a counterattack, exploiting the Sarathian weakness. The Federation's silent assistance had shifted the battle in the Drakons' favor. Verda's team completed their mission flawlessly and returned without leaving a trace. Back at Navenia's command center, the success was met with quiet satisfaction. Ryle knew the mission had been a success, but this was only the first step. Ryle took a deep breath and stared at the screen. "We've made our first move," he muttered to himself. "But this is just the beginning. Soon, the galaxy will know exactly who we are." After this operation, the Sarathian Empire was left wounded, while the Drakon Collective regained strength. But neither empire could ever know that the Federation had played a role. Secrecy was the Federation's only path to survival. But how long could this fragile balance be maintained? The answer lay in the future steps yet to be taken. After the explosions at the Sarathian Empire's outpost, the balance of power in the galaxy began to shift rapidly. The Drakon Collective had taken advantage of the Sarathians' weakened state, strengthening their borders and launching bolder attacks. Meanwhile, the quiet intervention of the Human Federation had gone unnoticed by all. Yet, a great danger loomed. As the two empires juggled new power dynamics across different corners of the galaxy, the Federation's position grew increasingly fragile. Commander Ryle stood in the strategy room on Navenia, gazing at the ever-expanding maps. The Sarathians had responded more quickly than he had expected. The Drakons, though secretly supported, hadn't yet brought the galaxy-wide war to an end. On the contrary, the Sarathians were regrouping fast and launching counterattacks. The war between the two great powers was becoming more chaotic by the day. Colonel Jaren entered the room in hurried steps. The tense look on his face signaled urgent news. "Commander," he said, breathless. "The Sarathians are deploying a massive fleet to the Drakon border. It's the largest movement we've ever seen." Ryle lifted his head from the map and looked at Jaren. "The Sarathians are recovering quickly. But what do they intend to do with such a large fleet?" Jaren shook his head in concern. "They're preparing to crush the Drakon Collective. If this assault goes through, the Drakons will be forced to retreat, and the Sarathians will begin to dominate the entire galaxy." Ryle took a deep breath. This could be the end of everything. The collapse of the Drakons meant that the Federation would soon fall under Sarathian control as well. But humanity couldn't intervene directly. Being detected by either the Sarathians or Drakons would bring the wrath of one of these empires. Ryle had to make a swift decision. "Where's Lieutenant Verda?" he asked, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "She just returned from her covert mission," Jaren replied. "The team is currently resting." Ryle's eyes lit up with resolve. "Rest time is over. Get Verda here immediately. We have a new mission." Within minutes, Lieutenant Verda and her team had gathered in the strategy room. Despite their fatigue, they were entirely focused on the task at hand. Ryle wasted no time and began speaking. "The Sarathian Empire is preparing a massive attack against the Drakon Collective. If this attack goes through, the Drakons will collapse, and the Federation will be the next target. We must stop this." Verda locked her eyes on Ryle. "But won't this drag us even further into the conflict between the two empires, Commander? If the Sarathians are preparing for an attack this big, how can we possibly stop them?" Ryle tapped the holographic map on the table, revealing the Sarathian fleet's movements. "The Sarathian fleet is large, but they have weak points. We can't hit them directly, but we can cripple their logistics. If we sabotage their fuel lines and communication systems, we can paralyze their assault." Verda quickly assessed the plan in her mind. This was a dangerous mission. But if they succeeded, the Sarathian assault could be delayed, and the Drakon Collective could maintain the balance in the war. "The team is ready, Commander. But this time, we'll need to take extra precautions. The Sarathians might be more alert after our last sabotage." Ryle nodded, appreciating Verda's determination. "You're right. This time, the stakes are higher. But we cannot afford to fail. We must complete the mission without the Sarathians ever knowing we were there." Verda and her team immediately began their preparations. Their stealth ships were rearmed, and weapons and devices were readied. The plan was delicate, the smallest mistake could cause everything to collapse. By midnight, the ships silently departed Navenia once again. Ryle watched the operation from the strategy room, his eyes fixed on the screen. Everyone had the same question in mind: could they pull off such a massive operation in complete secrecy? As Lieutenant Verda monitored the screens inside her stealth ship, she noticed they were fast approaching their target. They were close to the communication and logistics lines that supported the Sarathian fleet. If they managed to sabotage these lines, the Sarathian fleet would be rendered immobile, and the Drakons could seize the opportunity to strike back. "We're approaching," Verda said over the comms. "Stay silent. We'll complete the job without leaving a trace and get out." As the team neared their target, they realized the Sarathian defense systems were more advanced than expected. However, Verda's team was skilled enough to move without triggering the slightest alarm. As they infiltrated the systems and placed explosives, everyone held their breath. This mission could determine their fate. Finally, the sabotage was complete. As Verda returned to the ship and reported the success of the mission, one of the Sarathian patrol ships suddenly changed its course, heading straight for their location. Verda immediately recognized the danger. "We need to get out of here quickly," she told her team. The ships began their silent retreat, but the patrol ship was too close, and even their cloaking devices might not be enough to evade the Sarathian sensitive radar systems. "If the patrol spots us, the entire plan falls apart," Lieutenant Lyra said, trying to hide her panic. Verda gave a calm order. "Stay composed. Max out the cloaking devices and redirect your course towards the asteroid belt. We can lose them there." The team followed the orders swiftly, but the patrol ship kept closing in dangerously. Minutes felt like hours. However, as they entered the asteroid belt, the Sarathian patrol lost their trail. When they finally returned to Navenia, the team's faces showed both exhaustion and triumph. Ryle let out a quiet breath as he learned the operation had succeeded. The Cerathian fleet had been sabotaged, and their assault plans were thwarted. But this was far from the end of the war. Ryle knew that the Federation, caught between the two empires, was facing even tougher days ahead. "This is just one step," Ryle muttered to himself. "The galaxy is still a volcano ready to erupt. And we are standing right in the middle of the fire." The secret operations team of the Human Federation had successfully sabotaged the Cerathian fleet's logistical lines, pushing the galaxy into a new phase of war. The massive Cerathian Empire fleet had been rendered immobile due to the severed fuel lines, and the Draken Collective had seized the opportunity to launch a counteroffensive. However, Ryle and the Federation command knew this was only a temporary victory. As the Cerathians worked to recover, it was becoming increasingly difficult for the Federation to remain in the background. In Navinia, the capital of the Federation, tension was palpable. Everyone sensed that a major war was looming. Meetings between commanders and diplomats in Ryle's strategy room had become a round-the-clock affair. The Federation, caught between empires, needed bolder moves to survive. Commander Ryle paced back and forth in the room, his eyes deep in thought. What should the next step be? The sabotage had been successful, but it was just the beginning. The fate of the Federation now hinged on how long this war between the Draken and Cerathians would last and how the Federation would navigate through it. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Colonel Jaren entered with hurried steps. His face bore an expression of concern. "Commander, there's been a significant development," Jaren said urgently. "The Draken Collective launched a major counterattack earlier this morning. But the situation is far more complicated than we anticipated." Ryle immediately focused. "What happened? Did the Cerathians push them back?" Jaren shook his head. "No, quite the opposite. The Drakens are making successful advances, but in the process, our covert operation seems to have been exposed. The Cerathians are starting to suspect the Federation is behind the sabotage." Ryle's expression darkened. "So, the Cerathians are catching on to our involvement. This could lead them to launch a direct attack on us." Jaren handed Ryle a tablet. "The Cerathians have dispatched a new fleet toward our border regions. Whether it's just a show of force or the prelude to an attack, we don't know yet." Ryle took a deep breath. "This is our most critical moment yet. If the Cerathians attack us, we could find ourselves in the middle of a galactic war." He looked up at Jaren. "Set up a secret meeting with the Drakens immediately. If we're going to face the Cerathians head-on, we need the Collective firmly on our side." Jaren nodded and swiftly left the room. Once alone, Ryle leaned against the table, his mind racing. This could become the largest conflict in galactic history. The Federation, caught between two giants, had no room for error. If they couldn't maintain a balance between these two forces through diplomacy and military strategy, the Federation's survival would be in grave danger. By evening, the Draken Collective's representative, Terran Zaren, had secretly arrived in Navinia. The meeting was kept under tight wraps. Ryle and Zaren sat across from each other in the strategy room, the silence thick with tension. Zaren stared intently at Ryle. "We know the Federation has been manipulating this war with the Cerathians, Ryle," he said in a stern tone. "But we believe the game you're playing in favor of the Drakens should continue." Ryle calmly met Zaren's gaze. "We are not a party to this war, Zaren. But we must protect the Federation's existence. If the Cerathians grow too strong, they'll swallow up the Drakens first, and we'll be next. That's why we have to keep the balance." Zaren frowned. "The Cerathians are weak right now, but don't forget, once they recover, they could rule the entire galaxy. If the Draken Collective stands with the Federation, we can win this war. However, we expect full cooperation from you." A slight smile played on Ryle's lips. "Full cooperation?" That would jeopardize the Federation's independence. We can be your allies, but we won't become a part of the Draken Collective. Zarin shook his head firmly. If you're not with us, the Sarathians will destroy you. It's that simple, Ryle. Ryle took a deep breath. The stakes were growing ever higher. The cooperation Zarin was asking for could turn the Federation into little more than a puppet of the Drakons. But if the Sarathians won, the outcome would be far worse. We can't make that decision right now, Ryle replied. But the balance of power in the galaxy is shifting. We'll find our own way. Zarin stood up from the table and headed toward the door. Remember, Ryle, when the Sarathians attack, you'll want to be on the side of the Draken Collective. Otherwise, this war will be very short for you. After Zarin left the room, Ryle leaned back in his chair. They were on the brink of war, and the options before them were dwindling fast. The Federation would need to make both diplomatic moves and military preparations to chart its own destiny. Time was running out, and the moment of decision was near. Jaren, Ryle said quietly, summoning his aide who had just returned to the room. Prepare all Federation forces for war. If the Sarathians strike, we'll be caught in the middle of the largest conflict this galaxy has ever seen. In the capital of the Federation, Navenia, it was now evident that a great war was imminent. The Sarathian Empire's new fleet movements were edging closer to the borders. The Draken Collective, on the other hand, was pressuring the Federation to fully align with them in their quest to control the galaxy. But Ryle and his command were not ready to bow to either the Sarathians or the Drakons. The Federation Council's chamber was now the setting for the most critical meeting to date. Commander Ryle stood tall at the head of the table, his eyes scanning everyone in the room. On one side were diplomats from the Draken Collective, on the other side were the Federation's leaders and high-ranking military commanders. The atmosphere was thick with tension and uncertainty. Council Chairwoman Lenora turned to Ryle with a cold voice. Commander Ryle, the Sarathian Empire is clearly preparing for war. Recent movements at our borders pose a direct threat. The Draken Collective is demanding full cooperation from us. We must decide which path to take as a federation. Ryle took a deep breath. Chairwoman Lenora, an attack by the Sarathians is imminent. However, the Draken Collective's demand for full cooperation could strip us of our independence. After winning this war, they could turn the Federation into nothing more than a pawn. One of the Draken diplomats, Xian, interrupted Ryle. Xian spoke with narrowed eyes. It's not that simple, Commander. If you don't fully align with the Draken Collective, the Sarathians will destroy you. Your chance of survival in this galaxy depends on forging an alliance with us. Lenora gave Ryle a stern look. Commander, we need to make a decision for the future of the Federation. We cannot stand alone in this war. Ryle turned to the Council Chairwoman and answered firmly. We fight for the freedom and independence of the Federation. We can work with the Draken Collective, but submitting to their demands would mean the end of our Federation. If we are to stand against the Sarathians, we must do so on our terms. We cannot become a puppet state. A silence fell over the room. Everyone was absorbing Ryle's words. The Draken diplomats exchanged quiet glances, while Lenora took a deep breath and bowed her head. Commander Ryle, do we truly have the strength to do this? Asked the chairwoman. Ryle looked at all the leaders around the table. If the Sarathians attack, yes. We can form a strategic alliance with the Drakons but on our own terms. We will draw them to our side, but we will not become their vassals. If the Federation is to fight, it will stand on its own feet. Lenora paused for a moment before slowly nodding. Then it is decided. We will begin preparations for war. The alliance with the Draken Collective will proceed, but the Federation's independence will be maintained. At that moment, Jaren stepped forward from the corner of the room and spoke quietly. We have new information from the Sarathian Empire, Commander. Their main fleets are heading towards Navenia. They will arrive in 2 days. Everyone in the room held their breath. The war was at their doorstep. Ryle turned to Jaren. Are our forces ready? Jaren nodded. All our forces are in defensive positions. Additionally, the Draken Collective has agreed to send reinforcements to the border. Ryle nodded decisively. Good. Let's complete our preparations. When the Sarathians arrive, we will fight the greatest battle for the Federation's survival. 2 days later, Federation forces had positioned themselves in orbit around Navenia. Massive warships formed a defensive line around the planet. As the Sarathian fleet emerged from the depths of space, Federation soldiers and commanders held their breath, waiting. Ryle stood on the bridge of the warship with Admiral Tyron and other commanders. The Sarathian fleet advanced like a wall towards them. Tyron turned to Ryle. The Sarathians' initial assault will be fierce. Are our defenses sufficient? Ryle, his gaze fixed on the Sarathian ships, answered quietly, they will be. But this battle will not be won by ships alone. We will need to make strategic moves. At that moment, the Sarathian fleet began firing. Enormous beams of light illuminated the void of space and sped towards the Federation ships. The battle had begun. Federation defenses immediately responded. Laser cannons and plasma weapons created bright explosions in the darkness of space. As the Sarathian ships drew closer, the Federation vessels dove in, performing daring maneuvers to break the enemy lines. However, the Sarathians showed their numerical superiority, attacking with more ships every minute. At that moment, the Draken Collective's ships appeared from the other side of space and joined the Federation's defensive line. The Drakens, using their unique tactics, surprised the Sarathians with their assault. But the survival of the Federation depended on how long they could hold out. Ryle stood in the middle of the bridge, issuing orders. All fleets, launch a counterattack. We will breach the Sarathians' front line. Our target is their command ships. Admiral Tyron relayed the order to all ships, and the Federation fleet launched wave after wave of attacks. Explosions and maneuvers displayed the brutality of the battle. But the decisive factor was a strategic maneuver executed by Ryle and his team at the last moment. A surprise attack by a small fleet led by Captain Corvin on the enemy command ship caused the Sarathian fleet to scatter. When the command ship exploded, the Sarathian forces began to retreat. The Federation had won its greatest battle. Navenia's skies found peace, but the cost was heavy. Ryle, standing on the bridge, felt a deep sorrow for every lost soldier. Yet this victory showed that the Federation's existence had been preserved. The commander took one last look at the battlefield and took a deep breath, making a silent vow to himself, the Federation will always remain independent. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, see you in the next story.